Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon, and you need to get good. Get good! If you want to play Metroid Dread, it was released on, I think, Friday. I need to play it. I haven't played it yet. I was actually going to download it this weekend, but we did do the convention, which is where Geeky is. She's still there for one more day at Sci-Fi ValleyCon in Altoona, PA, and I didn't have time to play the game, but I really want to because I freaking love Metroid. We're going to talk about this. Squid King actually sent this over, that games journos are complaining that Metroid is too hard. It's too hard. It made me miserable. Games don't have to be grueling to be great. No, they don't. But there is satisfaction in completing a game, or at least getting better at a game that is difficult. I mean, video games were fundamentally created to be competitive. And if you're not competing against other players, then you're competing against the game itself, trying to beat the game. That kind of historically has been the purpose of video games. More recently, it's become about, kind of living your virtual life vicariously through, an MMORPG or, The Sims or Animal Crossing, whatever. And that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. But historically, it was about getting the high score. It was about completing the game. It was about doing better than other players. This is an old school game. Old school style game, of course, is going to be difficult. The Metroid series always has been pretty difficult. Going back to the very first game. In fact, I got the very first game when I was very young, and it was damn near impossible without, I had a player's guide. I don't know if you guys remember that, the NES. After they stopped packing Super Mario Brothers with the NES, they gave you a Nintendo player's guide, and it had maps for games like Metroid and Zelda and Kid Icarus and all of that. If it wasn't for the maps in that game, there's no way in hell I would have been able to beat Metroid. It was too hard. It was very hard. I've come to appreciate that, as I got older, just how difficult the game was. But, the series has been known for being hard and heavy on exploration. And if you were a games journalist and you understood the history of this game series, you probably wouldn't be complaining as much. You'd be like, oh, it's a Metroid game. Of course it is. Of course it is. So we're going to talk about that because this is a discussion that comes up a lot. And Squid King and I did a video a couple months ago about games journos talking about accessibility. Now, to me, accessibility always meant, making a game more accessible for deaf players or blind players or, people with other kind of disabilities or whatever. Now, accessibility means I should be able to beat the game because I paid for the game. Very different mindset. Ghosts and Goblins, they brought out a new Ghosts and Goblins and they basically nerfed it. Like, you can play it on regular difficulty, but if you die, they give the option of pretty much just breezing through it, which I guess some people appreciate, but it's also like a hallmark of Ghosts and Goblins. That series has always been how damn hard it is. And it was an accomplishment to be able to beat it. Not everybody sees things that way. So we're gonna talk about it for sure. Before we get into it any further, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants. Guys, over 236,000 subs. Thank you so much for the support. Greatly appreciated. As was the unexpected visits at Sci-Fi ValleyCon. We mentioned just in a couple of videos we were going to be there because we paid for the table a couple of years ago. They didn't do the convention last year, and this year it got pushed back. But we had a bunch of people show up. I was really surprised and very grateful. Thank you. Some of you traveled pretty far to come see us, which is very humbling because, we do these videos and we know people watch them. We know people comment on them. We know some people absolutely hate us, but it's cool to see people actually go out of their way just to come see us. And it's kind of weird. It hasn't really sunk in yet that so many of you watch us. But thank you again for the support. Greatly appreciated. Let's talk about this. Mashable's got an article on it. Launcher has an article on it from Washington Post. Metroid Dread is a thrilling twist on a classic, but may be miserable. Games don't have to be grueling to be great. It's not that Metroid Dread is a bad video game, I just never want to touch it again. If masochistically punishing games aren't your thing, I'd strongly recommend avoiding it. In every way, the latest side-scrolling adventure for intergalactic bounty hunter Samus Aran is faithful to the spirit of its predecessors. In fact, this new story is straight up a continuation of the narrative that the original game kicked off. Dread, like Metroids that came before, sets our armored heroine loose in a sprawling complex of corridors, ducts, chambers, and with most of those locations sealed off behind obstacles that can only be circumvented using one tool or another. And yes, it created an entirely new genre of game, Metroidvania. All those tools are, of course, locked behind fearsome boss fights and other threats. Most of the baddies can be defeated with Samus's trusty arm cannon and missiles. However, clearing the hazardous locales of planet ZDR where Dread is set is no easy task. Like every other side-scrolling Metroid game, this is a game of pattern memorization and recognition. Like every platformer and shooter ever made. Look, how many games have you played and how long have you been playing video games? I gotta ask. Enemies move and attack in predictable ways, and they always appear in the same locations when you re-enter a room. Yes, it's old school. Bosses work the same way, although they draw from a wider pool of attacks. But whether it's an enemy-filled chamber you need to clear or a whole entire boss, the expectation is the same. Throw Samus at the threat again and again to learn the patterns, master the timing, and persevere. Yes! And the problem is what? What is the problem? That is literally every video. How do you get good? How do you get good at video games? You play them again and again and again and again until you get good. Until you know the patterns. Until you know all the tricks. How do people become, video game champions? They learn every damn move. If you're playing a 2D fighting game, you memorize every damn frame of every character and you have it down like how many milliseconds between frames and attacks and who works best against who. I mean, yes, this is how video games fucking worked years ago. This game is a throwback. I'm sorry that you don't have a lot of experience, obviously, with that. That's been the approach for Metroid games and Metroid-like games, such as Hollow Knight, which is awesome, by the way, and it's interesting. Just a couple of months ago, the Mary Sue, of all places, one of their writers said that thanks to Hollow Knight, I finally understand why people like Dark Souls and other extremely difficult video games. But let's go back to Metroid. The tricky part for the creator of these games is finding the line between satisfying challenge and punishing slog. Oh, God. So the whole review is complaining about how hard the game is. Of course, what qualifies as challenging is deeply subjective and influenced by everything from the underlying creative vision to the taste of the would-be audience. Difficulty settings can make a tough game more approachable. Accessibility settings can make complex controls less of a burden for players who need or want an easier time. This is an old school game. It is what it is. Games don't have to be grueling to be great. For a beloved elder franchise that has fans spanning multiple age groups, a high barrier to entry is a crushing disappointment. That's where and why Metroid Dread is a resounding failure for me. You can't change the difficulty or make the experience more accessible. There are no compromises that might ease the pain of a particularly challenging encounter. If you get stuck on a boss for 2 hours, hopefully you'll get a handle on it before the 3rd hour passes or the 4th or later, because that's your only option. I remember I got stuck on The Legend of Zelda, the original, and I wound up having to order the tip book because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I tried, and oh my God, I tried every single day for like 2 months until I finally broke down and sent away and I put Zelda on a shelf until I got the book. And I think I want to say it was part of the 7th underworld dungeon. I want to say, I don't know. I don't remember. Anyway, I was young and it was hard. It was really fucking hard. And I spent a lot of money on the game because, it had a battery backup and all that. And I got the tip book and I didn't use the tip book to beat the whole game. I only used it to get through the part that I was stuck on. And then I was fine. I think something like that happened to me in Link to the Past too. And I had to call Nintendo and be like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do here. And I got stuck for a while. That used to happen to me. I'd get stuck on these games, and sometimes I'd put them on a shelf for a couple of months, and I'd come back to them with fresh eyes, and I'd be able to do it. Secret of Mana was incredibly frustrating for me because they're like, you have to walk the seasons, but the color patterns of the trees didn't make a lot of sense. Really, you're just kind of walking like in a circle, but I was trying to zigzag from one side, you know. Anyway, this is part of gaming. This is part of old school gaming. And I'm very sorry. To me, this tells me that you haven't played a lot of old school games. This was why, you know, people played games. It wasn't just like, I want to go relax and go fishing in my Animal Crossing village. And there's nothing wrong with that. We play Animal Crossing, it's okay. But it was about winning. It was about learning how to beat something that was hard. It was about the feeling of accomplishment, which apparently the Mary Sues even understand. Like, it feels good. It feels good to beat a damn hard game. You know, it does. It feels very good to beat a game that will kick your ass and laugh at you. Comparing hard games to Dark Souls may be a tired meme at this point, but this is a case where the spirit of that meme actually applies. It's a hard game, but it's a static challenge. You're either going to get it or you won't. Yeah, just like shooters, just like fighting games, the uncompromising approach extends beyond the moment-to-moment gameplay. Metroid Dread is incredibly vague about what you're supposed to do at any given moment. Yeah, it is. So was Super Metroid. Super Metroid was actually a cakewalk compared to the original Metroid. Again, the original Metroid was so damn hard that if you didn't make your own maps or go out and buy the player's handbook or have the player's handbook, it was damn near impossible. Because you couldn't just kind of remember where you're going. Like, you had to make maps. You had to. Phantasy Star was that way too. Phantasy Star 2 was one of the hardest RPGs ever, and it wasn't because the game itself was grueling. There's a lot of grinding, but the dungeons were so damn hard. We used to make our own maps. That's how we beat these games. We'd make maps. I probably, when I sold off my copy of Super Metroid, I probably had scrawled down some like really rough maps or something of where I was going. And that was Super Metroid. Super Metroid was a hell of a lot easier than the original Metroid. Okay? I'm just saying. The rigid design's heartbreaking. The characters respawn. The pop-ups. Is there anything about the game itself other than it being hard? You're penalized for failing. I don't want to get the kind of good that's required here. Oh, get good. I tried it and it was deeply unpleasant. When I got stuck on a certain boss for multiple hours, so much frustration built up in my repeated attempts to beat it that there was no satisfaction when I finally succeeded. I have teeth marks in my... I don't have it anymore. I had teeth marks in my Sega Genesis controller because of Ghouls and Ghosts. Because it was that fucking hard. I got so angry, I bit my controller. Because if I recall correctly, I finally got to the end and I died stupidly, and I knew better because I'd memorized the patterns at that point. I died stupidly on the second run through because you had to beat it twice to actually beat it. Very, very upsetting for people who don't like hard games, right? And I was almost there and I died like a punk, and I had to go way back to the beginning. As that continues. Anyway, I love Metroid. It's a damn shame. I love Metroid. I want to play all the Metroid and experience its whole story for myself, but it's too hard. How can you love Metroid if you don't know how hard these games are? Do you actually love... Are we talking just Metroid Prime? Are we talking like Other M? Are we talking... You like the character of Samus? How could you not play an old school Metroid game and know that it was really damn hard? Washington Post, same thing. Metroid Dread is a great story wrapped in a hand-cramping, confusing grind. So, there was no review of the actual game. Just, it's hard. It's hard. Metroid Dread, and Spain-based developer Mercury Steam, very nearly accomplished all the goals, except for one key component. Its world design is hard to commit to memory. Players of Metroid games are required to remember inaccessible locations they discover early on, so when they finally do find the tool or power-up required to access that location, they would know how to revisit the area and find a reward. Like every other Metroid game. Like every other Metroid game. I don't understand why they're so surprised. Now, at least I'll give the Washington Post, they're talking about the game getting better. You know, it does get better. Et cetera, et cetera. But most of the reviews I'm seeing from a lot of these places are just complaints about how hard the game is. Metroid Dread was going to be a struggle against its own legacy. I can't help but think of what we've been missing since Nintendo left its wildly innovative spin-off Metroid Prime series to languish for 14 years. Nintendo has promised a fourth game in the mainline series, and that kind of fresh look at the Metroidvania genre demands a revisit. Metroid Dread is a good Metroid-style game, but does little more. The game industry has proven throughout the years the Metroid formula is worth iterating and reiterating upon. Now that the formula is back home in the original series that created it, here's hoping Nintendo remembers this too. Basically, if your Metroid game is too hard to be a Metroidvania game, we'll go with people who make easier games. You know, Microsoft calling for an end to get good. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what you expected. It's a Metroid game. In the vein of the 2D Metroid games, it's gonna be hard. You're gonna have to remember where shit is. You're gonna have to remember patterns. You're gonna die a lot. That's the way it works. Holy shit. Game journos are such pussies now. Gonna wrap it up. Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, guys. We'll talk later.